Kia ora, decultivists. If you're here to learn more about coercive control and cultic harm, we've got something for you. Decal Talks is a series featuring the best sessions from our impactful 2024 Decal Conference in Aotearoa, New Zealand, with 40 international speakers. As the conference director, I'm excited to bring you powerful survivor stories, expert insights, and discussions on recovery, advocacy, and justice. Check out our website, decal.net, where you can already register your interest for the next Decal Conference in 2026. Tune in on all podcast platforms and let's raise cult awareness together.
Hello and welcome to the Cult Vault Podcast, your dedicated podcast for uncovering the darkest corners of cults and coercive control. I'm your host, Kacey, and I want to start by thanking each and every one of you for tuning in. Your support fuels our deep dives into these critical issues. Before we get started, a word of caution. Today's episode may contain discussions on abuse, including graphic descriptions of abuse, and covers a variety of human rights violations that may be triggering for some listeners. Please consider this as a trigger warning and proceed with caution. I'm thrilled to announce that I'll be appearing at CrimeCon UK in London on the 7th and 8th of June 2025, and again in Manchester on the 27th of September 2025. Join me and a host of world-leading experts, advocates and noisemakers at the heart of the true crime community. This is the UK's biggest true crime event, and you won't want to miss it. Use the code CULT, C-U-L-T, for 10% off your tickets. And remember, there are flexible tickets and payment plans available to accommodate everyone. This incredible event is sponsored by True Crime, and it's always my favourite weekend of the year. I hope to see some of you there. And for those who want even more from the Cult Vault podcast, you can access early, ad-free content by supporting me at patreon.com/thecultvault, where every pledge not only gives you exclusive access, but also directly supports the continuation of this work. Thank you again for your support and your listenership. Now, let's unlock the vault. Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of the Cult Vault podcast. I'm your host, Kacey, and I am joined today by author Beth Granger. Hi, Beth. Would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Thank you, Kacey. I'm so delighted to be here. Sure. My name's Beth Granger, and I am a cult survivor. I'm also a representative plaintiff in a landmark class action lawsuit against our abusers, which we'll get to. I'm a diet culture dropout and a recovering overachiever. And I am now a published author. So that sort of sets the stage, I guess. I mean, I will say, to really set the stage, I was the first baby born to parents at a private elite boarding school called Grenville Christian College. And it advertised as an Anglican school, but in truth, it was a cult hiding in plain sight. We even duped the Anglicans. The truth did not come out till the school went bankrupt. But when I was 3, our school fell prey to 2 leaders of a commune called the Mothers. And that commune was in Cape Cod, or it still is actually, and it's called the Community of Jesus. And under their influence, our school became an institution of paranoia that brainwashed and abused and terrorized its residents for decades. So that's kind of the setting the scene for the story.
And I had not heard of Grenville Christian College until I read your book, Born and Raised, Surviving the Cult Was Only Half the Battle. And that's such a powerful title because so many of the things, and I've said this before on the podcast a few times, so much of the media that we have access to, documentaries, newspaper articles, podcasts, a lot of the time those stories focus on the experiences of the cult almost through the lens of the cult leader. So there's not a lot from voices of people specifically born and raised in cults, and actually the steps that people have to navigate post-cult to recover from that experience. And I think that that's so important, because if you listen to some piece of media that you resonate with and then it stops halfway through and you're like, hang on a minute, you've told me that I'm suffering with the same thing, but you've stopped. Like, hang on, there's more. Tell me how I kind of get over this whole thing.
What happens next? That's what I always want to know. Yeah. And I thank you for pointing that out. I should clarify that the title of my book is Born and Raised, spelled Razed, or Zed, which gives it the full meaning. But I love how you pointed that out, because I relied on memoirs. We didn't have podcasts when I left, but I relied on memoirs essentially. And they almost all ended when the person left the cult, or, got out somehow, and the triumphant escape. And I wanted to know seriously, how are they dealing with the past, and how is it affecting them? And am I normal? What's wrong with me? That sort of thing. So I tried to write. It was very important for me to write at least, I think, over a third of my book is the recovery process because I wanted to write a book that I needed leaving the cult, So, yeah.
Yeah, born and raised, as in raising a town or raising a village, or, and I think that is such a powerful play on the words, because that is what happens in cultic groups. Your whole identity is raised. Your whole community is raised. If the group splits or you're shunned, again, everything's raised. So that's such a strong title, both the former and latter part.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, in our cult, and most cults, the point is to break people down. And that was really the point of our, the goal of our leaders, if you will. And they, so when you leave, you're broken, and it's very, very, it's basically a journey of a lifetime, I think, for many people to repair and recover. So, yeah, I tried to touch on that. Well, not just touch on it, dive into that in my story. Yeah. So
it's such a well-written book. And I was just looking through the list of names of from acknowledgements that you've had for your book. A lot of people on that list have been on this podcast. A lot of people on the list have written their own memoirs, which is really cool. What's it like to publish a memoir about your life experience in a cult and have that type of support for your writing?
Well, it's scary, as it's terrifying to publish. It's one of the hardest parts is that if you're like me, you are trying to get into the publishing landscape without a following. So I wasn't successful to get an agent and do the traditional publishing where, everything's paid for you by the publisher. So I was able to partner with a really excellent hybrid press, and they led me through they sort of showed me the path to getting these endorsements and told me to write a wish list. This was last summer, and it took me about 3-4 months of constant listening to podcasts, reading memoirs, doing all these things to find a list of the people that I would love most to endorse my book. And that was so scary. I spent probably the whole time feeling like an imposter and who do you think you are kind of voices in my head. But I knew I had a good book, and thank you for your compliment. But I knew it was good, and I just had to be so brave and then write write individualized letters to each one of them to tell them who I was, and would you please read my book? It would mean so much to me if you did. And I was told that the rule of thumb is if you seek endorsements from people that you don't know, the general rule of thumb is you'll get 1 out of 10 saying yes. And I think I asked 40 people and I got 16. So it was a pretty good,
Yeah, absolutely.
and it meant the world to me, to answer your question. I mean, it's so scary to put out a memoir. You feel, does my story matter? Will anyone like it? Will anyone think it's even, like relatable, all that stuff. And so these endorsements just meant the world to me. Yeah.
I'm just going to read out some of the names for listeners that might recognize some of the people that have been on the podcast. And if this isn't praise enough for listeners to go out and be like, oh, I wonder what this book's all about. If they haven't read it already, then maybe this will tempt a few people. So here we have Stephen Kent, who's very prominent in the cult recovery and education field. Janja Lalich, who is a good friend of the show. Janice Selby, who is also a friend of the show. Here, Julie Jenkinson, Anka Richter, carrying on down the page, Meg Applegate, Kate West, who's a recent guest on the show, Jarette Bouillon, who I just absolutely adore. Oh my gosh, so many incredible names of wonderful people that have had such an impact on the cult recovery space. And your name is now in amongst all them people. How amazing.
Yeah, so exciting. I'll never forget, actually, the first person that I heard from was Janice Selby, and she sent me an email that she couldn't put my book down. And I was like, oh my God. And then I got a text from someone you didn't mention, which was Sarah Edmondson. And she is the A Little Bit Culty podcast host, but she was on Nexium The Vow. And I got this text that she said, I'm loving your book. And I was like, oh my God. Anyway, so yeah, it's just great to hear.
That's amazing. That's good. You need all of those little messages help to stamp out those self-doubting and nasty little voices that we get in the back of our brains telling us to stop trying to do what we want to do in the way we want to do it.
Exactly. I needed those. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because I'm really proud and delighted to have those endorsements.
Well, one of the names on the list I thought was really interesting because I drew so many parallels between your writing and the work that we've done on the podcast around the troubled teen industry. How much of the troubled teen industry were you aware of before you wrote this book?
Just, let me think. I'd read a couple memoirs, I think, is basically it. I'd read Silenced, I think it's called. Don't remember who. Sorry, my brain is, I have a bad memory. But which we might get into because it's caused by drugs. But yeah, I was aware. I'd maybe seen a couple documentaries. I could see the relationship between my experience and the troubled teen industry. Although ours is ours really is related in many ways because we had teens at our school. But ours was so unique in that we were advertised as this elite institution, that people were sending their kids not as troubled teens, but as basically getting a university preparatory education. And, we had people on our board of advisors who were from the highest levels of society and government. We had 3 lieutenant governors on our board. We had the Bishop of Ontario, Anglican, and, High Commissioner to Great Britain, senators on the board from the outside world who had no idea what was going on behind our walls. So that sort of sets us apart from the troubled teen industry in that usually those are, I don't know, they're all unregulated. Let's just say that. And that's the huge problem.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that's one of the reasons I want my book to gain traction, because I'm so afraid of what's happening, especially in the United States. But we can talk about that later. But with them dismantling the Department of Education and ushering in private schools en masse, it's terrifying what can happen to students being indoctrinated and abused without regulation.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely. It was definitely the attack, like the hot seat activities and the kind of in parallel to like attack therapy, scream therapy from the troubled teen industry, but of course originally from Synanon. So I was just wondering where that tactic originated from in terms of the community of Jesus, the mothers. I was wondering where they, and if there was any ties to things like Synanon or some kind of attack therapy group. Because it's a strange thing to introduce to a religious setting. I think it's not often you'll find that type of public humiliation or ritualistic humiliation in that specific form.
Right. There's a friend of mine who was at our school and is also an author, and he's been doing a lot of research, and I think his book is coming out soon. But his book is very much academic research, and he explains and answers this in detail. I haven't read it yet, though. But what I know is that the mothers from the community actually went to a convent in Germany. In the 60s, I believe, and that convent was it was in Darmstadt, Sisters of Mary, I think it was called, and they were basically using Nazi what's the word, coercive control tactics, and this kind of attack therapy to quickly gain control of people. And I can't speak to the details because, as I said, I haven't really got a full understanding of it, but I know that they spent a lot of time there being trained and influenced in that setting. And then they came into the community. They started their own commune at the Community of Jesus, where they started people became nuns and monks there. My brother is one of them to this day. He still there. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it kind of it's what I know.
Definitely does. It definitely does. And I think it kind of goes back to a lot of the stuff that not only Robert J. Lifton talks about, because he's the godfather of cult education, so of course he's talked about this, but Edgar Schein's idea of coercive persuasion with freezing, changing and unfreezing as well, with a lot of the brainwashing tactics that were used in the Korean War with prisoners of war, which I'm sure translated directly from Hitler's regime and Nazi Germany. They all kind of take influences from each other, don't they? And you see this a lot at the moment with online cults and things. But back to Grenville Christian College, it was interesting reading the formation of Grenville and how it really did seem like it had its problems, financial problems and teething problems, but really it seemed to be much more of an idyllic place until these people showed up and told you that there was a problem with the college that they could solve.
Exactly. Yeah, I have very good memories from the first few years of my life. I was born the year that the school started. And it was actually not called Grenville Christian College. It was called Berean Christian School. And it was part of what they wanted to have happen was a global franchise. They already had locations in Texas, New York, Scotland, and they were starting something in Africa. And one of the leaders at the New York school, the Higgs, became the founders of our Canadian location, and because the Higgs were Canadian. So it just so happened, though, that when they found the campus and they made the deal to buy the property, that same week, the New York location went bankrupt. And so they convinced all the staff there, including my parents, to move up to Canada and start the school within a month. I think it was in 6 weeks they started a new school, and they brought a lot of the students up. And it was, missionaries, basically kind of a missionary vibe, if you will. And they were very evangelical, which is not necessarily benign. But anyway, the model was that staff would live in community, be paid very little, sacrifice their life for the greater good. And everything, just, there was a lightness to my memories. For one thing, I was allowed to live with my parents. That changed. But I didn't know that the school was floundering financially, and that the leadership wasn't cohesive, and that, what else happened? Staff were becoming disillusioned after about 3 years, and that's why they looked for outside input. And that's why once they found the mothers at the community, and they were really impressed with their commune. It seemed so disciplined and successful and cohesive. They went down there and they were really impressed, and very after our leaders. Anyway, they quickly became convinced that the mothers were basically the answer to our problems. And the key, they would be, if we followed them, they'd be the key to our school's success. And so they invited them up to Canada to lead retreat. And the retreat stretched out to 2 weeks during the school year. Can't imagine how that worked. And the retreat was full of what classic cult tactics, like love bombing, prophesying about the wonderful success that God will bring you, all the visions that they had for the school. And on the flip side, just breaking people down right off the bat, preaching to them that they were a repository of rebellion and that God needed to purge their group, and that they needed to, if they were going to stay, they had to make lifetime confessions, which were used against them right off the bat, and that they needed to vow obedience to the mothers, and you're all in or you're all out type thing, So I wasn't aware of all this, but I could feel right away the whole vibe of the school changing, and it became very paranoid, and my parents changed right before my eyes. And soon after, it was like, I like to say, it was an all-you-can-eat buffet of coercive tactics were just dumped into our lives. Like, our families were dismantled. Staff kids were moved away from their parents because we were told, our parents were told that they were blind to our sin, and that their sin of idolatry had to be eradicated. And idolatry meaning loving your children above God. But what I internalized was that it was a sin to love me, which is a profoundly damaging thing to learn when you're little. And then, as we said, we talked about attack therapy. We called those alight sessions, and they happened constantly, from small groups to full school assemblies. People were publicly shamed and attacked for sins, real or imagined. And you never knew when you'd be next. And we lived in constant fear. And then soon the staff were required to take vows of obedience for life. And discipline became a huge part of our lives too. Draconian discipline that was both harsh and unpredictable. Anything from paddling, which they did indiscriminately with the students mainly, and very severe paddling, to harsh labor that could last indefinitely. So anytime you got in trouble and you were put on discipline, you would be given harsh labor. And it was usually, there was no end given. So you didn't know how long it would be. And you were basically told until you've changed, until we can tell you've changed. And, or even things like, we girls had our hair cut short if they considered us to be acting like temptresses. Jezebels. And, so, and then there was a spy network, I keep hearing this in so many cults where the leaders everybody reports to the leaders. So, if you're on the bottom, you're always in trouble, but you don't really, I didn't realize during our trial that this was an actual network where everyone was reporting back up the chain. And staff and prefects and were expected to turn people in or attack people in light sessions for a long list of rules that were both written and unwritten. And that's just a few of them. I could keep going, but it's like, the indoctrination too. We could talk about that for a long time, how we had to listen to the mother's teaching tapes and we had to do excessive prayer. And then I guess one more thing is that we had our lives were so controlled. So we didn't have ability to decide where we're going to live or what we were going to wear or jobs. My dad, when they got there, my dad was the principal of the high school. And he said, I was principal in the morning and in the afternoon I was digging ditches. Like, because they kept changing jobs. You just never knew what would happen. So yeah, it was, classic cult.
You mentioned the kind of environment of surveillance that existed. And there was also a lot of self-policing. And that was through like a lot of mystical manipulation, like, saying that they already knew what you'd done. So you might as well tell them now while you have the opportunity to come forward with. And sometimes there was just nothing to say. Like there was just nothing to say. And this was really like reminding me of a lot of the forced confession stuff that you hear about in the troubled teen industry. But it was making me feel like I couldn't breathe some of the times, because they're like, tell us,
Yeah.
Beth, tell us, Beth. And you're like, I just don't know what to say. And then, of course, there were times where you did have things that you really, really just wanted to hold on to. I don't know if you could talk the listeners through the story about the pair of jeans, because like that was like your small little victory and you wanted to keep that for yourself. But of course, with the self-policing system that was in place, you didn't get to keep it for very long.
Oh yeah, I love that. That's just such a classic example. Jeans were considered the devil, basically, not the devil, but sinful, evil, and so even students would get on discipline if they found a pair of jeans, even in the storage room, which was locked and they didn't have access to. But even having it on campus, you could get in great big trouble. So when I was grade 8-ish, I got invited to spend a week in New York City in the summer with one of the boarding students. And I had only brought skirts to wear. And one day she said, do you want to try on my jeans? And I was just like so conflicted. I was thinking, like, is she the devil trying to tempt me? And I decided, okay, well, I was curiosity won. And so she taught me how to squeeze myself into the jeans. The whole classic lying on the bed, pulling the zipper. And so I spent the whole day in those jeans, and I remember walking down the streets in throngs of hundreds and thousands of people, worrying that I would see someone from Canada who knew me. Like I was like, but anyway, I came home and I wasn't about to tell anyone I'd done that, but that's the thing. in these light sessions, you just get hounded. It was either we know you're this sin or that sin, or we know you're hiding something. And I just got so afraid that God had told them what I'd done. They must know that. So I basically confessed it. And then they told me that I couldn't go to students' houses anymore because I wasn't to be trusted. And, I was anyway, all the sins. but it's, yeah, I'm crazy.
You're the only daughter, is that right? You've got 2 older brothers and a younger brother?
Correct. Yeah.
So the gene story feeds into talking a bit about purity culture, because you explained like you could feel the genes like on your curves, on your body, and it was like a strange feeling to have something close to your skin, not something that's loose and flowing where, you can't really make out the shape of your body. So with being separated from your mum and not really having any guidance on how to navigate the purity culture of the college, how was that growing up with all of these messages on how you should behave and how you should wear clothes and things you shouldn't wear and things you shouldn't do with your body, but not really being given an explanation on why you can't do all of those things, just being told it's sinful with no other context?
Yeah, it's really so confusing because we weren't given sex ed. We were very explicitly taught that sex was dirty, evil, to be avoided at all costs. And that girls were the cause of any sexual sin or any kind of predatory behavior, any kind of sexual assault or rape. That would be the girl's fault, the woman's fault. We were taught to feel ashamed of our bodies, of our curves. And, we were responsible if boys lusted after our demon flesh. And girls were publicly accused of being whores and Jezebels and bitches in heat. It was so prevalent that I normalized it. Like, I both normalized it and I dissociated, because I have heard from so many people telling me the same thing and I barely can remember it. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just so weird. Like, those words, I remember only a few cases where they were said to me, but I've heard from one of the other representative plaintiffs. The only other one was female, and she was called a whore publicly when she was 12. And, for smoking, like they'd caught her smoking, but they yelled at her she was a whore. And then our clothing was so strictly controlled in a nonsensical way. I don't know, it's impossible to say it here, but I included a letter in my book that was written by the deans of women to the parents, basically outlining all the rules for the girls' clothing. And honestly, if I were a parent today, or even back then, reading that letter would have confused me and alarmed me so much. I don't know how parents accepted the ridiculous, because it wasn't, you can't have anything too tight. It was, it can't be too tight. It can't be too loose. It can't be too short. It can't be too long. It can't, do you know what I mean? Like, there was nothing that was actually acceptable. And then, things got crazier as the years went by. We couldn't wear bathing suits without shorts and t-shirts on them. And at the Community of Jesus, I was sent there at one point for a very large punishment. And at that time, they made us start wearing dresses to swim in the ocean, like from my neck to my knees, dresses with shorts underneath. So all of that was happening. And just to further answer your question, jumping ahead, when we did finally get to trial with the lawsuit, it was interesting. We had a psychologist who was an expert witness speak to the various abuses that she recognized that were going on at our school. And one was, she called it sexualized abuse. And some of the examples that she said that were occurring at Grenville were requiring sexual confessions. They would interrogate us and want every detail. What do you fantasize about? Where, all that stuff. Berating students for inciting lust. She said the vilification of homosexuality is part of that. Using derogatory terms such as temptress, sluts, whores. Any preoccupation with sexuality and sin. And she also mentioned two other things. One that directly, like, I had experienced when they made us bend over to see if they could see our cleavage or see if our underwear would, ride up in the back. And also just humiliating students for having romantic feelings. A lot of us got in trouble just for having crushes. I was too afraid to even talk to the guy I had a crush on. But we were still harshly disciplined because they whenever they could find proof that someone liked someone else, that was enough to be in trouble. So these are all examples of the purity culture that I went through.
The romance. Oh, I was like all for the romance. I was like, yes, Matt, come on. I was like, I mean, do you know where he is? Do you know where he is now?
I do, because I kind of, I don't know, I can't remember how, but I found him on Facebook a few years ago, and he obviously wasn't very active on Facebook, so I didn't know if, I didn't reach out to him until I'd written my first draft, and I thought, if I'm going to include this part of the story, I want his approval, and so I sent him a Facebook message. And he agreed to receive the manuscript and look at it. And we got talking. It was just great to kind of reunite. And I was worried because I know this is probably giving away more info, but once I started the lawsuit, I lost a lot of friends. I lost most of the staff kids basically disagreed with what I was doing with the lawsuit. And I lost all the relationships with most of the former staff that I had worked with as well. And there were plenty of students, too, who were prefects who disagreed with the lawsuit. So I didn't know if where he stood, because he had been a prefect, too. And luckily, he was very upset with the community of Jesus in Grenville. and he completely supported the book, and it's that was a good. And interestingly enough, his family he had been a regular boarding school student as far as I knew, but then after he left, his family got kind of sucked in by the community of Jesus, if you will, and so he had two sisters who were still there up till recently. One of them recently left, but so anyway, that's where that one ended up.
Well, at least you have each other to lean on with having a sibling still within the teachings. There's a really beautiful part in the book where you welcome a baby brother into the world and you absolutely adore him and you're besotted with him and you try and spend as much time with him as possible. Have you spoken to him about his experiences and how he remembers those moments in your life?
My baby brother, my younger brother. Yes, I've tried. He is, when I say people are broken by these systems, he is the classic example. I'm sad to say that he's currently in jail. He's been in jail, in psych wards, or homeless for much of his adult life. And so when I bring up my book or my trauma, it seems ridiculous because, I mean, my trauma pales in comparison to the way his life has been impacted. And so, yeah, it's difficult to talk about it. And I asked him to write an impact statement for our lawsuit, which lasted for 16 years. And it took him years and years to finally do that. And he sort of made an attempt. And just the attempt put him into a manic state, and he got arrested. And, it's just so hard for so many people to even talk about the past. So I don't know, maybe someday he'll be able to read it. And it will be helpful for him. I'm not going to push that on him.
I'm so sorry to hear that about your brother. That's so...
Yeah.
It's hard because of how you speak about him in your book as well, and how much it meant to you and your family for him to come into the world.
Yeah, it is a tearjerker. Every time I think about him, I want to start crying. Yeah.
In terms of your older brothers and your parents, have you sat down to speak with them about the impact of the mothers in the community of Jesus coming in and flipping everything on its head, and watching you and your brothers go through everything from afar because your parents were separated from you? Have you had a chance to have that conversation?
Yes, my parents, I'm happy to say, have come to both support the lawsuit. At the end, they started supporting it. Not at the beginning, but right near the end, they realized its importance. But they also supported my book, and we spent a very key weekend together while I was just starting writing, and I just peppered them with questions. And I wrote down everything they said, and also my dad gave me some of his confession letters, which I published one of them in the book. And it is so powerful because you see through what he's writing the level of control, like brainwashing. How he was just his brain was hijacked, and I think it must have been from the get-go, because how else would you relinquish your children? How else would you stand by and let them be raised by all kinds of other people? We were passed from family to family, and I witnessed their change right as a 4-year-old. I could tell they were changing. But I think, to answer your question, they always say that they were just trying to survive. And I know it's not an excuse, and they've apologized a lot, but they were so preoccupied with their own survival that they assumed we were okay. And they thought they were the ones getting abused, not their kids. And I think the same thing goes for all the staff. They did not see the damage that was happening to the students, even though they were being publicly humiliated right in front of their eyes. They didn't get it because they were being publicly humiliated probably 5 times more than the students were. And as a staff kid, I never really saw the pain that the students went through either, because I thought, well, it's way worse for me. So if I can handle it, so can you. But, this is all relative. And as far as my brothers go, I have an older brother who lives near me, actually. And he was one of the first people to read my first draft and helped me edit, some of all the little mistakes that he could see. And he's been really supportive. In fact, he and his partner came up with the title. I have to credit it to them. So I thank him for that so much. But as far as my second brother, who I mentioned he is a monk at the Community of Jesus. I basically have no contact with him. He was my daughter's godfather, if you imagine. When she was born, she's 20 now, but 2 years after she was born, we started the lawsuit, and we didn't sue the Community of Jesus, but they were indirectly implicated. So that was when I lost contact with him.
Wow.
basically. And then I've mentioned Robbie, my youngest, who is also lost to me. So, yeah.
I think, again, that goes back to your title, doesn't it? Surviving the cult was only half the battle, because you're still, estranged from one of your direct family members, and another one is heavily impacted psychologically.
Yes.
I mean, you're all impacted psychologically, but it's almost like sometimes that you wonder if there's any hope of a full recovery when a pre-existing mental health condition is exacerbated through traumatic experiences. And I don't know if that's the case with Robbie. I don't know if there was anything pre-existing, but we see all too often in groups where psychological warfare is used on people that pre-existing mental health conditions are severely exacerbated.
Yeah.
To the point where sometimes people just disappear forever, and there's no way to get them back. I hope that's not the case here for either of your brothers. I hope that at some point there is a chance for you to have relationships with both of them.
I would love that. I'm not holding my breath, but but I mean, it is so painful to have your family shattered. And and I will say, like, my parents, even though they support what I do, it's very hard for me to feel the kind of, like, I see other people's relationships with their parents, and I feel such a distance from them. And, even though we live nearby, it's just it's really hard to rebuild, when they basically, the mothers taught it is a sin human love is sin before God. That's a direct quote that they used to preach. So it wasn't just families they dismantled. They made it point to make sure friendships weren't formed. And, it really impacted kids. Everyone.
When I have done some interviews with survivors of the Children of God, especially kind of second or third generation survivors, there's this moment where the level of indoctrination used as standard ramps up with the children that have been born into the group. And that's because, the parents kind of were recruited or influenced or seduced into the group, or however people would prefer that process to be worded. But the children didn't make that decision. They were born and forced into that belief system and that way of life. And there's almost this silent rebellion that takes place amongst the second and third generation of children, where the indoctrination tactics have to be ramped up to try and attempt to brainwash or indoctrinate the children in the same way the parents have been indoctrinated. And you do talk about this process in your book, where you think you're the only person that's being sort of told off for having lustful thoughts or, trying to seduce somebody else. But then you find out slowly that actually all the children are being subjected to this higher level of control and indoctrination. And I just thought that was such a fascinating part of the book to read.
Really? Yeah. Well, I mean, the light sessions were scheduled for us staff kids. That's what we were called, the staff kids. And so we couldn't escape that kind of indoctrination and attack, basically. And we were taught right from early teenage years, we would meet in these light sessions that were, like I said, they were on the schedule. They couldn't escape them. And we were expected to attack each other. So if you were quiet during the light session, during the meeting that week, at the end of the meeting, you were going to be targeted. So you needed to speak up and be seen speaking truth. I have quotes in my, truth to others, or you would be attacked yourself. So it was kill or be killed. And that's why that was one way they effectively splintered us all, because none of us could trust one another. And none of us really knew what it was like to have a friend you could count on or even open up to about your actual emotions. So I think that, and then that ramped up, as you said, they have to keep turning up the heat and turning up the intensity so that they keep control over us. So even in my 20s, when we were basically told if we left, we'd go straight to hell, that God had called us all to stay there for life. We had to take vows of obedience for life. I took mine publicly at 21. But the heat just kept going higher and higher all through my 20s till some of the disciplines that I had later in my 20s were just like they came out of the blue. I'd never even imagined the kinds of things they were forcing us to do. So yeah, like you said, they do turn up the heat, and they do make us suffer in isolation too. You can be in a light session and you can see what everyone's being yelled at for, but we also, it's a strange way of being isolated, and a lot of our light sessions were behind closed doors, and I had no idea what other people were going through. And now when people are reading my story, they're reaching out to me and saying, I had no idea, even though they were there at the same time.
Yeah, so I guess it's that idea of just being in survival mode again, individually being in survival mode, and the power of having somebody to confide in, the power of having somebody resonate with your experiences and validate your experiences. It's no wonder they all wanted to keep you separate, because just going to visit your friend for a week and trying on a pair of jeans did something to you and your story. Yeah. If that would have happened 2, 3, 4 more times, you just don't know how much faster your journey would have come to an end in this particular group. And they don't want that. So the children have to be, treated as extreme cases of thought reform. And that's absolutely what happened. In your story is the most extreme case of moving goalposts that I've ever read in my life. And at this point, I must have read like over 100 cult memoirs. Oh my goodness. They just... Oh, you go through these, you've already mentioned, not a dress too short, not a dress too long, not a dress too tight, not a dress too loose. But that was with everything, and it's exhausting. You talked about how they would shame you for your weight. So you lost loads of weight, and then they shamed you for being too thin. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Nothing you did or anything anybody did in this place was good enough or right or correct. Everything was always wrong. And if you are striving to succeed with impossible goals, how can you ever expect to get anywhere? And the purpose, of course, is that you just keep going through this cycle.
Well, that was the crazy thing, which wasn't also, again, in the trial. I had this confirmed when someone else testified, because she was an admin. And she broke our case open, basically, because she was the only person who came forward to speak the truth. But she confirmed that the crazy thing was, like you said, perfection was expected, and high achieving, and just absolutely the best of the best. But don't you dare feel good about yourself. And as soon as they could perceive us starting to get confident in any area, like music or academics or sports, we were publicly humiliated, ashamed, taken out of the thing we were good at, denied, it's all through the book, right? But, I often got lead roles in the Gilbert and Sullivans, and I never got to play one of them because of my perceived sins. And basically this woman who testified, she said, that was part of our belief system, that no one was supposed to feel good about themselves. So it was this really strange, like you said, moving the goalposts. You're always looking towards, some sort of accomplishment, and then it would get whisked away before you could achieve it, or never, don't you dare feel good about yourself. So yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Striving for perfection, but never giving you a solid framework on how to achieve that by design. You know, and that's kind of where a lot of the survival comes in, because people are second guessing everything they're doing.
Oh yeah.
Questioning, so like, should I be doing this? Shouldn't I be doing this? Oh my gosh. I was just like, this
like the community of Jesus. This didn't, I talked about that one example where, you know, here we are, we're preparing an orchestra for a big concert, and you know, the correction was that we weren't playing in the Spirit, you know, relying on the Holy Spirit. So we had to go home and memorize everything, the whole concert for the next day. But I've also heard where, just to keep everyone out of control and leaning on the Holy Spirit, they made everyone in the orchestra switch instruments. So, like, you know, you're a violinist, now you're going to play the flute. Like, and so it doesn't matter that you've had years and years of training on this instrument, and you're going to rely on God.
Yeah, like, if it's God's will for you to play the trombone, it'll happen.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Oh my God, there were moments where I would find myself laughing as well. You know, it's a hard book to read, and some of the earlier moments you talk about, like, having great memories, and I think that that's really important, because when I first started doing these podcasts, I was like, everything's bad, throw the baby out with the bathwater, and then through speaking with people, I realized actually there are parts that people want to keep, so it's not always to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And one of the bits that made me laugh was when you had some people come over to do kind of like a prayer session, and everyone started speaking in tongues, and you said that you nearly died of embarrassment. And that secondhand cringe, like, it cripples me when I'm out in public sometimes. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I'm so embarrassed right now. I don't even know where to look, or my butt cheeks clenched. Like, that's the only way I could describe it. And that bit was making me laugh, because I was like, I know what you mean.
Oh, I cannot tolerate that.
So I guess the next part of our conversation is to ask you, when did you leave? What happened to Grenville? And how did this class action lawsuit come about?
Oh, wow. Well, you'll have to read the book. No, let me just give a few, you know, taste that, you know, just a few samples of what you'll get in store. But so how did I leave? Well, as I said, life in my 20s was not easy. It just kept getting harder. And we were taught that that God had called us for life, and if we left, we would be going to hell. So it didn't matter that we weren't happy. Like, you didn't expect to be happy. But I started realizing that as I got older, as I approached 30, I started realizing I don't think I'll ever be happy here. And I started realizing I wasn't okay with that. And that was a very rebellious thought. And I knew it was. I actually felt scared feeling that. And it didn't help that I was, by the time I was 27, I'd given up hope of getting married there. We weren't allowed to marry outside of any of the community. And there were many more women than men. And I talk about how I actually finally got engaged, and I was, really excited about that, planning the wedding. And then the man who I was engaged to, who I actually worked with in the same office, he broke off our engagement without explanation. And I just sunk into an intense depression. I could barely just breathe. I was so depressed and so unhappy. And I think looking back, it's that I got a taste of what it was like to be loved, and a taste of what it was like to be special to someone. And that getting taken away, I couldn't live without it. Basically, it didn't help that I was pushing 30 and still a virgin, and the fact that he actually, side note, became a monk himself. He went down to the community, and he's still there. So anyway, I was incredibly depressed, and at the same time, I needed knee surgery, and during the recovery, I was allowed to go off campus for aquafit and physio, and I started meeting people and getting stronger and starting all of that. And, I get more into it. It gave me a sense that I felt like a caged animal, and I couldn't tolerate my life anymore. And then I started questioning things. And for the first time, I started getting angry when people would accuse me of my sin. Before, I was always ashamed. At that point, I started getting angry, and I started seeing through their ridiculous accusations. So it took me 3 years to decide to leave. And I finally decided that if I was going to hell, so be it. I honestly didn't think there was anything wrong with Grenville. I didn't think they were abusive. I thought I was failing them in leaving. But I finally decided I had no choice. And so there's a lot more to that story, but you asked, and when I said I didn't know that it was abusive or problematic, that came to light 6 years later when the school went bankrupt and decided to close its doors. When that happened, it was like a volcano exploded of allegations against the school. And it all happened online on this website called FactNet that has since been closed and bought by Scientology, because people would post on there their anonymous abuse stories, and Scientology didn't want it up anymore. But yeah, we had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people posting one that summer that Grenville closed, and I started reading it, and I couldn't believe my eyes. I finally understood that I had been abused and that hundreds of students had been abused, and everything started to make sense. And everything started to haunt me because I realized we had damaged so many students. And soon after, the school went on record, the final leaders went on record denying all the allegations and saying there was no truth to them. And that's what I needed to spark my fury. And I, by then, understood it was a cult. And so, yeah, a few of us decided that was enough. We went to the Anglican Church, and we spoke to the bishop and we told them everything. And then we realized that wasn't going to do much, and we decided to start a lawsuit. And we launched it in the very beginning of just a few months after the school went bankrupt. The lawsuit was launched, and like I said, it lasted 16 years. And when I took part, I was just beginning to understand that I'd been abused. But I knew that taking part was going to be an important part of my healing. I didn't know how. I just had this very clear sense that it was what I needed for my own healing. And I was right.
For 16 years, did you learn a lot about the judicial process of a class action lawsuit during that time?
Yes, I had so much to learn. It's kind of, it's good that you don't know what you're getting into with sometimes in life when you decide to bite the bullet. It's kind of like getting married or whatever. If you knew how hard it was going to be, nobody would do anything, right? I had no idea it'd be that long. I had no idea it'd be that hard. And I remember we got to trial, which almost no lawsuits go to trial. When we were in trial and I was on the stand for 3 days, I nearly, it nearly broke me. But I thought if I had known, there's no way I would have said yes. This is so excruciating. But looking back, I have no regrets. And I'm very proud that we persevered, and we set precedent for systemic abuse and in our country, and we've been told that our lawyers have been contacted by lots of people and other lawyers looking for advice, and it's yeah, I could probably write a book just about the lawsuit itself.
So do we get to hear the outcome, or do we have to read the book?
Oh, sure. I can give that away. We won on all counts. We and then we went through 2 years of an appeal, and we won again with the 3 appeal judges. What's interesting is that, and what's still frustrating is that you have to find a way in, right? So for us, we proved that the school breached its fiduciary duty. That was the key of our case.
It's always money. It's always money. That's the way you get in. Oh, fraud. Oh, haven't paid their taxes. Yeah. Oh, sure. We'll take a look into it.
Yeah, like that. But to prove that it was a cult or that it was abusive in the way it worshipped or practiced religion, none of that mattered. I mean, that's all. That's all fine. But luckily, it was a boarding school, so they had a fiduciary duty to the students and the staff kids who were basically taken. We proved that we were taken from our parents' care, so we got to be included. But it is frustrating that that religious freedom covers a multitude of sins, and yeah. I wish there was more recourse for people who have been damaged by religion, because it is no small thing.
No, I am hopeful that it will change, especially with like landmark court cases like this one that allow people insight through documentation that's public now, right? It's in the public realm.
Yes.
People can go and read over court transcripts and court verdicts and outcomes, and even just go on to like Canadian newspapers and international newspapers and read just the bullet point highlights of the case. Things like that, and the change in legislation and politicians being open to expanding coercive and controlling laws against group coercion. All of these small efforts, I do hope, will culminate into some positive impact on the legal system at some point. But we are currently in this place where your court case is probably like brand new territory for the lawyers on both sides, and for the jury and for the judge, who are all like, wow, this is like so new to me, unless those people have been in exploitative religious circles before.
It was, basically our lawyer kept saying, we're just heading into the Wild West. This is uncharted territory. And she actually, our lead lawyer, is now a judge on the Superior Court. So, but she was hoping that we would finish the case before she retired.
Well, I think there's a point to be made about sisters, because there's been a lot of stuff over here coming out about the Magdalene laundries over in Ireland and the Sisters of Quiet Mercy. We're hearing about these sisters and the Sisters of Mary, did you say?
Yes, I think that was what it was called, the Sisters of Mary. Don't quote. I mean, people can Google it. I don't know.
There's this idea that sisters in convents, nuns, live a pure, godly, good, infallible life. And that's not always true. And I think sometimes, if we were to look at Robert Cialdini's Psychology of Influence and just how a certain title or position can give you a level of power and influence without being questioned, without being vetted. That's a part of society I think we all need to be a bit more careful in. If somebody comes in with a dog collar on, are they instantly a better person than the person on your left?
True.
just because they have a religious status does not mean that they are going to be pure and godly and good. Because these women were not.
Well, the mothers, actually, when Grenville closed and all the shit hit the fan, a lot of newspapers were being, a lot of articles were being published, and one was called "The Mothers of Invention," and they were exposed for the fact that they were actually a lesbian couple. Both of them had several children. They had basically abandoned their children, abandoned their husbands, and this was actually happening. And, you know, we were being taught that homosexuality was worse than murder. And, you know, the duplicity and the hypocrisy is just, it's outrageous. Yeah.
That's wild. There were just certain parts of that, like that hypocrisy that you've mentioned, the double standards between like the mothers and the people that they were directly harming, that was just incredulous. You know, you just read it and you're like, what? Hang on. At one point I had to read back over a bit where one of the main women just like divorced her husband and then left after telling everyone for their whole childhoods that they can never get divorced if they get married.
Yeah.
So it's just, obviously if you meet a nun, you're probably going to be like, wow, she must be a great person. And she probably is, but we should always just exercise caution when we give people unregulated confidence purely based on their position and their title.
And the problem too, it extends basically to all religion. I mean, people are so open to harm through religious leadership, and I just hope my book and all of our stories opens people's eyes and makes people much more cautious, and especially when it comes to children being entrusted under their care. It's really scary what the long-term harm that can happen. When religion is weaponized, I should have said. Yeah.
In your memoir, you talk a lot about your love for music, your father's love for music. You include some journal articles and confession letters that you've written in your memoir. And you talk about having a love of performing and being on stage. And a lot of these things are used in sort of art therapy, performance therapy, and they are tools of recovery that some people use when they are navigating trauma. And I've had it said that sometimes if a person is recommended to use the same tools in recovery that they were forced to use when they were in a cult, it can actually make a PTSD diagnosis worse. So my question to you is, have you used any of those things in your recovery? Do you have an aversion to them? And 3-part question. So I just do this all the time. People are like, wait, what are you actually asking me? What advice would you give to other people who are on their own path of recovery?
Okay, so as you said, music was a huge part of, well, it's my DNA, basically. My dad is an exceptional musician. He's still teaching at a local Steinway studio. He's teaching piano, but he was the director of our choir and our bands and, you know, GNS, Gilbert and Sullivan. Anyway, it mattered so much to me growing up, and I really, you know what? I've actually heard that people who are in music or art in a cult are in some ways shielded from some of the harm because of a certain aspect of a healing aspect of it. And I don't want to get into all that, but I think it really actually helped me to be part of, you know, the music scene there. But again, it was weaponized, and I often was abused for my talent. They would actually target people who were more talented. So it was very painful. And when I left, I didn't sing for 15 years. I didn't play my viola for 15 years. It was all just put on the shelf. And I, like you said, it was too painful. And I didn't even realize that it was something I missed. But my psychologist was always looking for ways to help me recover. And one day she said, "Is there anything artistic from your past that you would like to revisit? Because I think you're missing something." And right away I thought singing. So it's funny. We were always told that we were too haughty, our family, like haughty as in arrogant. And anytime we did well with things, that was the biggest sin we had. So we never deigned to acknowledge our talent. And so when I went to my dad and I told him I was going to audition for this big choir in Ottawa, and the choir sings at the National Arts Center, it's a big deal. I told him what the kind of music they sang, and he right away said, "I don't think you should audition. You're not going to be ready you're not going to be prepared for that level." But something told me he was wrong, and I drummed up the courage, and I had such a good audition. They asked me where I'd been hiding. And then I know, and I laughed and I thought, do you really want to know?
Well, now that you ask, let me just tell you a story.
Yeah. I have a story for you. So I've been singing with them for 10 years, and I sometimes do solo work, and it's just really healing. It's been so wonderful to sing and just be. I was very well trained. Like, that was one thing about Grenville that was a silver lining. We had a good education, and we were well trained in the arts and all disciplines. Anything that you were involved in, you're going to get good training. But music is a healing part of my life now. And I also discovered through when and I'll get into this, but I don't think we will have time today, but I basically had a breakdown about 5 years ago and I haven't been able to work. And part of that breakdown was caused by withdrawal from the drugs that my psychiatrist had me on for too long. Anyway, my heart was racing. That was part of it. And I couldn't figure out how to calm down, and painting turned out to be the answer. So I discovered I'm actually really good at painting. And that was just such a healing thing, and it continues to be. And then writing was another thing that obviously it ended up with a book. But writing, I think I've been benefiting from years of therapy, like almost 2 decades. I've had therapy since I left Grenville, because I became a teacher and I had the benefits. But no therapy touched the transformative power of writing. It was like I had so much dissociation growing through those 3 decades, and writing forced me to open doors that were locked and remember things almost like by magic. It would come to me as I'm writing, and it was just like the tears. It was so, like, I think you can sense it in the book when somebody's writing from a place of healing. And every day I finished writing, I'd feel a little lighter, a little more empowered. And it lasted for 2 years to do the first draft. So yeah, I think that would be my advice for people in your healing. Like, seek out those things that you can maybe take back into your life and reclaim them in a positive way. Yeah.
Yeah, that word reclaim is so powerful, to be able to take back something that you love, something you're good at, something you get praised for, something you feel good about doing, and not feel scared about it, but to indulge in it and to feel empowered by it is so powerful. To take that back as something that is for you, something that you enjoy, that cannot be taken away or touched by somebody else. And that is incredible. I am so happy to hear you talk about, people telling you that you have talent, and you allowing yourself to say that you have talent is huge. And just to see, how much it means to you to be able to take part in those artistic activities.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that, because it really has been a huge part of my recovery, and just like a happy part of my story. 'Cause, yeah.
Well, I can't recommend the book enough. Born and Raised, Surviving the Cult Was Only Half the Battle by Beth Granger, which is available online now. I will put links to the book everywhere you can find it in the episode description. And Beth, is there anything that you would like to say or add today before we say goodbye?
I guess, well, before I thank you, I want to just say that the audiobook is coming out. I have narrated it. It's taking an eternity to have it edited. I want to call them every day and find out where they're standing, but I'm trying to be patient. Anyway, the audiobook is coming. But I just want to thank you for such a wonderful discussion. Yeah, this has been really great, and I really appreciate your questions and that you read the book. And yeah, the work you're doing is so important, and you obviously have so much experience. I really appreciated talking to you.
Thank you so much, Beth. I've really enjoyed the book. I always feel a bit cheeky when authors email me like, hey, do you want to interview me about my book? I'm like, only if you send me a copy.
Awesome. It makes it so much easier.
It does. And sometimes people are like, no. But then so I'm like, okay, well, then I don't know how I can talk to you properly about your book if I don't,
Right.
read your book, especially because sometimes the books aren't released when people email me. They're like, I've got a book coming out. Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, that's awkward.
Yeah. So I appreciate you sending me a copy as well. And I really did enjoy reading it. And I can't recommend it enough to the listeners. And if anybody does go ahead and buys a copy or listens to the book, as I always say, reach out and let me know what you think, because I love to have discussions with listeners about their thoughts on books that I've also read. So thank you so much, Beth, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much, too, and have a great weekend.